Working the night shift at Saint Jude's isn't about the adrenaline you see on television dramas. It is about the silence. It is about the antiseptic hum of the floor buffers and the rhythmic, hollow clicking of your own shoes against the linoleum. Most people assume the hospital is a place of constant motion, but at 3 a.m., it is a tomb of waiting. You learn to live in the contrast. On one side, there is the clinical reality of charting, vitals, and the steady beep of heart monitors that signify a life being sustained by modern science. On the other side, there is the darkness pressing against the reinforced glass of the lobby, a reminder that the world outside has stopped, while you remain in this sterile, fluorescent bubble. I have been a registered nurse for 7 years, and I've grown accustomed to the smell of bleach, masking the rot of failing organs. I find comfort in the routine. There is a safety in the protocol, a shield built of paperwork and medicine that protects us from the raw, ugly truth of mortality. However, tonight, the shield felt thin. As I sat at the central station, my ears began to ring with a high, sharp frequency that bypassed my hearing and settled straight into my marrow. It was an alarm bell of the soul, a sudden, jagged spike of fight-or-flight response that had no logical trigger in a ward full of sedated patients. My skin felt cold, not from the air conditioning, but from an internal shift of perspective. I looked down at my hands, steady and pale, and realized for the first time that I wasn't just monitoring the living. I was guarding the gate against something else. The ringing in my ears eventually subsided into a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to vibrate the very floorboards of the nurses' station. I tried to focus on the intake forms for room 412, a new arrival we simply called the Long Man, because his frame stretched so far past the footboard of the standard hospital bed. My supervisor, a weary woman named Brenda, had given me a look of deep, exhausted warning when he was wheeled in, a look that said more than any medical chart ever could. He wasn't here for a cardiac workup or a routine gallbladder removal. We all knew that certain patients at Saint Jude's were special cases, the kind that arrived in unmarked black ambulances without sirens. The staff whispered about them in the break room, making jokes about the third shift special, or the resident who doesn't bleed, just to keep the terror at bay. We used humor as a scalpel, trying to cut the tension into something manageable. But looking at the monitor for 412, the joke died in my throat. His vitals didn't scroll. They jumped in stilted, janky bursts that made no biological sense. It wasn't a heartbeat. It was a series of mechanical thumps, like a heavy weight being dropped inside a hollow drum. I remembered the viral rumors of the tri-limb patient from 3 months ago. The ones the night staff swore they saw scuttling through the hallways with a disjointed tripod gait that defied human anatomy. We laughed it off then, calling it a collective hallucination fueled by too much caffeine and not enough sunlight. Yet, as I watched the door to 412 slowly creak open from the inside, a shadow stretched across the hallway that was too long, too thick, and possessed too many joints. It wasn't a limb, it was a protrusion, a fleshy, hand-ended appendage that gripped the doorframe with a strength that made the wood groan. My breath hitched as the innuendo of the shadow revealed the terrifying truth. He wasn't here to get better. He was here to feed on the silence. The hand-ended appendage didn't just grip the wood. It seemed to taste the air, the fingers twitching with a deep bubbling sound that mirrored the noise of broth on a heavy hob. That sound, a wet, ear-batteringly deafening groan, sent a jolt of liquid-fueled fear through my legs as I stood frozen behind the safety of the desk. It was the sound of something from somewhere else, a noise that felt like it was being generated by a mechanism of bottomless depth, rather than a living, breathing throat. As the door swung wider, the stilted, janky motion of the shadow on the far wall intensified, looking like a disjointed trick of the dim moonlight rather than a human patient. The weight of it was unimaginable. Every time the thing shifted its center of gravity, the floorboards beneath the heavy-duty hospital linoleum creaked with a series of sharp, rhythmic snaps. I realized then that the third shift special wasn't a joke. It was a physical presence wearing the night like a shawl. The air in the hallway grew thick and metallic, the scent of antiseptic suddenly replaced by something cold and rhythmic, a smell that felt like wet earth and ancient iron. I watched as a three-legged silhouette emerged, its movements possessing a stilted, janky motion that was shaped like nothing earthly. It didn't rise and fall naturally like a person. It spun and shot forward at a frightening speed, moving with the terrifying efficiency of a macabre tripod. My jaw hung as I realized the third leg was an alien appendage, a nude, hand-footed limb that emerged from the center of its mass to propel it forward. The bubbling intensified, a deep, deafening vibration that battered my senses until I could no longer tell if the sound was coming from the hallway or from inside my own skull. The stilted, janky motion reached a crescendo as the thing fully breached the threshold of room 412, revealing a horror that my clinical mind struggled to categorize. It was a nude, three-legged creature that walked through the parents' hallway of the ward, illuminated only by the cold, flickering glow of the overhead fluorescent tubes. The middle limb, the third leg, didn't end in a heel or toes. Instead, it featured a human hand with fingers flat against the floor, acting as a macabre pivot point for its movements. Each time it advanced, the hand-footed leg lifted over the floorboards, with a series of snaps, hammering its full might into the linoleum with an unimaginable, unthinkable weight. The creature's proportions were a nightmare of biological design, where human legs swung through the air, propelled forward by the bending third leg, which emerged from the groin area like some alien appendage. As it drew closer, the bubbling sound became a startling groan, a deep and ear-battering noise that yanked the air right out of my lungs. I watched in a frozen tangle of terror as the hand on the third leg suddenly reached out, the monstrous fingers stretching with a frightening speed toward a heavy equipment cart. It didn't just move, it possessed a stilted, janky motion that was disjointedly like nothing I had ever seen in a medical textbook. The creature looked at me with glistening gray pupils, dark eyes that nevertheless shone brighter than the black of the darkened corridor. It wasn't looking for a doctor or a cure. It was lowering itself onto its two human legs, preparing to use that third, inexplicable limb to shut the world away from anyone unlucky enough to be caught in its path. The three-legged thing didn't attack me. It simply watched me with those glistening gray pupils before turning to scoop the discarded medical equipment into its alien limb as if it were an enormous talon. I stood there, a frozen nurse standing in the middle of a silent ward, watching as the shadow washed across the far wall one last time. I don't know what the three-legged thing did with the contents of that room, and I don't know if the hospital board will ever find out why the records for room 412 went missing that night. Before my neighbor in the ward limped back into the darkness, he looked at me with those dark eyes that nevertheless shone brighter than the black. That is about the only thing I know for sure about the night shift at Saint Jude's. Hey there, kids. It's me, your narrator. I just want to say thank you guys for watching tonight's video and listening to tonight's episode of the podcast. Your support means the world to me, especially for those of you who listen to the non-stop radio while it's running in your sleep. I appreciate you guys greatly, and it is incredible to have you here. Thank you for being a part of this journey into the dark.